Starting off this countdown, we have the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians did a number of rituals after someone died to ensure they made their way to the afterlife. First off, the dead were put to rest surrounded by their personal items. Their tombs were filled with tools, food, wine, perfume, household items, clothes, etc. Everything they believed they would need for the afterlife. In fact, the food was carefully preserved to ensure it would last them for their long journey to the afterlife. Then they had the embalming process and the canopic jars. So the Egyptians made sure to preserve the vital organs for the afterlife. They did this by carefully removing the organs from the dead and placing them in jars. One jar was for the lungs, one was for the stomach, the other was for the intestines, and one for the liver. The heart was always kept in the body though. Again, all of this was done to ensure the individual got to the afterlife with no problem. And lastly, we have the burial mask. People of power were often buried with a burial mask on. These masks were made to resemble the person that they were placed on. It was done so that the spirits would recognize the body after death and help them to the underworld. Furthermore, the mask was filled with oils which helped with the mummification process. And lastly, the Egyptians also created something known as the Book of the Dead, which helped them prepare for the afterlife where Osiris, the god of the underworld, would judge them. Coming in at number 9, we have ancient Greece. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then make sure to give it a big thumbs up because it really helps us out. The ancient Greeks had a quite different view on the afterlife. They believed that when a person passed away, they would take a ferry and go to the underworld to Hades. But no matter if you were good or bad during your lifetime, it was believed that everyone just went down there to the same spot. And obviously it's no sunshine and rainbows down there, it's pretty cheerless. So everyone that was buried had to be done so with a Greek coin in their mouth. This was enough to pay for the ferryman for the trip across the river Styx and to Hades. Well, then the Greeks were like, screw this, why should there be equal misery for all? So then they began the good go on to the afterlife. So from the 6th century BC onwards, they believed that if they practiced certain secret rites, then they would get to go somewhere that was a happier place. Moving on to number 8, we have reincarnation. A number of cultures believe in reincarnation, particularly Buddhists. So they believe that after you die, let's say you have unfinished business left on earth, then your soul will be transferred into another body to enjoy life again. The reincarnation process will continue on and on until you accomplish everything that you believe you have been set out to do. By doing so, you will reach nirvana. It's the end of suffering and a heavenly paradise where your soul can rest. Moving on to number 7, we have the Chinese burial rituals. Similar to ancient Egyptians, the ancient Chinese believed that the dead should be buried with everything they would need in the afterlife, such as their personal property. In fact, people of power were often buried alongside their servants and soldiers. So they would engage in human sacrifice in order to make sure that the individual would be protected by their soldiers in the afterlife, but also would have an assistant there as well. That was until Emperor Yin Shi Huang. When his tomb was unearthed in 1974, they found an army of 8,000 life-sized terracotta soldiers. They were designed to be his protectors in the afterlife. So instead of sacrificing 8,000 people, they just created these ones instead, which is a much better choice if you ask me. Coming in at number 6, we have the water burial. A number of cultures, especially in Nordic countries, engage in something known as water burials. It's a sacred ritual in which the dead are placed in coffins and then at the top of cliffs facing towards water. Or they would place the bodies in something they called death ships. Then their bodies were placed on a river or ocean and pushed out. This was said to give the bodies back to the gods. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Jainism. There are approximately 4 million people that follow Jainism. This is the belief that there are a number of gods out there, as well as they believe in reincarnation. Similar to Buddhism, they believe that they will continue to reincarnate until they reach liberation. Liberation is only achieved if they avoid bad karma and cause no harm. Now here's the thing, the reincarnation process is pretty dark. So when people die and don't achieve liberation, they might have to go through 8 hells of suffering before their rebirth. Each hell gets colder and colder and gets worse and worse. The soul is subjected to a number of torturous things before they reach the final hell and are placed back on Earth for another chance to reach liberation. Once they do, their soul gets a place among the gods. In our fourth spot today, we have the Chinese traditional religion. Individuals who follow the Chinese traditional religion believe in a peaceful life after death. In order to do so, the individual needs to perform specific rituals to honor their ancestors, like partaking in prayers, ancestor worship, longevity practices, and more. Now, upon death, the god Cheng Wang will determine whether someone's spirit is good enough to go to paradise, or if they will go to hell and then reincarnate to try again at life. Moving on to number 3, we have the Aztecs. The Aztecs believed that when someone died, they would enter one of 3 places in the afterlife. Sorry if I pronounced this wrong, but they are the Mictlan, Tlalucan, or the Sun. Mictlan is the underworld. Those that lost their lives from horrible causes would end up there. Tlalucan is a paradise ruled by a rain deity. So those that lost their lives by drowning or by getting struck by lightning or even by dying from a disease associated with the rain deity would be sent there. And those that lost their lives during childbirth or any fallen warriors would transform into hummingbirds. In our second spot today, we have the Mayan burial rituals. The ancient Mayans viewed getting to the afterlife as a dangerous trip. As a result, they buried the dead in a way that they believed was easier for the soul to pass through the afterlife and into paradise. So the dead were buried with maize, aka corn, in their mouths. That to them was a symbol of the rebirth of their souls. It was also said to provide them with nourishment on their journey. Additionally, their bodies were positioned in their graves in the direction of the Mayan paradise. They believed this would make it easier for them to get to the afterlife. And lastly, their bodies were sprinkled with red cinnabar and wrapped in cotton. This was said to be a disguise for them to avoid being attacked by demons while on their journey. Everyone who passed away had to go on this journey except for those who died at childbirth or died from sacrifice, battle, or took their own lives. If this was the case, it was believed that their soul would pass directly into paradise. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the lost souls. Now, let's talk about the poor souls that can't find peace and are stuck here on Earth. These are what we know of as ghosts. Now, ghosts are often tied to the location of their death. They often are stuck in that area if their death was sudden, like they were murdered. They then may start off not realizing that they are actually dead. Sadly, most ghosts won't be able to leave until they find peace, whether that be getting justice or help catch their killer or saying goodbye to their family. It makes it even harder though when they don't receive a proper burial or if their body was never found. These ghosts are stuck haunting the earth until their body is found and they can reunite with it, or until they receive a proper send-off, for example, a funeral. If not, they might never reach the afterlife. Starting off this countdown, we have the sky burial. In Tibet, Buddhists who believe in sending their loved one's soul towards heaven will partake in something known as the sky burial. Basically, it involves leaving the deceased bodies on top of a mountain to decompose naturally or to be eaten by birds and other animals. This was done for a number of reasons. First, it was considered as an act of generosity because they are providing food to sustain life, other animals. Second, it was also believed to help unite the deceased person with the sky or sacred realm. In fact, they believe that when someone dies, their body contains nothing more than just flesh. Their soul has already moved on. So they find that it's okay to give the body away to the animals and help with the circle of life. Moving on at number 9, we have Famadian. Famadian is a funeral tradition that is practiced in Madagascar. It involves opening the tomb of the deceased every year to rewrap them in fresh burial clothes. Sometimes it's referred to as the turning of the bones. This burial practice also involves them sometimes spraying them with wine or perfume, and then they rewrite their names on cloth so that they will always be remembered. Then the bodies are taken out of the tomb for community festivities. This is all done to help push the spirit of the dead towards the afterlife, as well as to show that they haven't forgot about their ancestors. Coming in at number 8, we have the ceremonial suit of jade. During the Han Dynasty, royal members were often buried in ceremonial suits of jade. This was done for a number of reasons. One, it was said that the suit would preserve their flesh for eternity. 2. The suit would protect their body as they went into the afterlife. And 3. The Han rulers believed that jade would preserve the souls attached to it. So basically, these suits were created by cutting jade into square, rectangular, and triangular shapes. These shapes were then threaded with wire together until it made a suit big enough for the deceased's body. The type of thread used to create the suit symbolized the deceased's status. Emperors had their suit made with gold threads, whereas lesser royals had silver and those underneath them had copper. Lowly ranked aristocrats had it sewn together with silk. Because of jade's hardness and durability, they associated it with protection and immortality, hence why they wanted to cover the entire body in it. It would keep them safe and help their soul get to where it needed to go. Moving on to number 7, we have the finger cutting. The Dani tribe of Indonesia would partake in self-harm rituals in order to keep the spirits of the dead at peace and to keep bad spirits from getting to them. Although the Indonesian government banned it, some individuals still practice it today. So the tradition involves women tying strings onto their fingers very tightly until it's numbed. Then they will cut off a segment of their finger and then cauterize the tip to stop the bleeding. This practice is also said to be helpful in allowing physical pain to then help the processing of the emotional pain. So after they did this deed, they would offer their fingertips to the spirits of the deceased to keep them at bay. And then the segments were dried and burned and the ashes placed into their homes to ward off any spirits. In particular, the spirit of the person that had passed. Coming in at number 6, we have Epicureanism. Epicureanism is a religion 300 years older than Christianity, and they believe in multiple gods. But none of these gods are watching humans and seeing what we're up to. In fact, they don't even believe in an afterlife or reincarnation or heaven or hell. They believe that when an individual dies, that's it. The soul just dies with them and that's all. Sorry that this one is a little depressing. They believe, and I quote, "Death is nothing to us, for that which is dissolved is without sensation, and that which lacks sensation is nothing to us." It's also said that we should never fear death. Here's another quote: "While we exist, death is not present, and when death is present, we no longer exist." So basically, when we die, we won't know that we died, so what's the point of fearing death? We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Christianity. Christianity is believed to be the biggest religion in the world with the most followers. So you might be a little familiar with the Christian beliefs. Basically, upon death, it's believed that they will come face to face with God and be judged for the deeds they have done or failed to do during their lifetime. If you have been a loyal follower of Christ, you will be granted eternal life in heaven, which is said to be a place devoid of pain, crying, or mourning. Then you have hell. If you reject God, you will be sent to hell. Those that go there are the ones that refuse to accept the happiness that God wants to share with people. Then we have purgatory. Now, not all Christians believe in purgatory, but basically after death, purgatory is a place where people who have sinned can make things right. Once they have done so, they will be granted access to heaven. In our 4th spot today, we have ancient Rome. Back in the days in ancient Rome, they believed that the deceased would live on in the underworld. Similar to ancient Greece, they have the ruler of the underworld that is like an equivalent to Hades. In the underworld, there is the field of Elysium where the souls of the blessed reside. Or you have Tartarus, where the damned gets to live. The unburied, though, would wait restlessly on the shores of the river Styx. Those who weren't buried were considered to haunt the living. Continuing on, they believe that souls of infants, falsely accused criminals, and people that took their own life would live in a limbo-like realm. Not only that, but some believed in reincarnation as well. Moving on to number 3, we have Norse religion. In Norse religion, after death, it was said that warriors were sent into these great realms. But in order to get there, they needed a vessel. So when someone died, back then, Vikings would place their body on a boat and push them off to sea. These boats were often surrounded by weapons and goods, even sometimes human sacrifices, all to help them get to their end destination. Not only that, but more wealthy Vikings would actually burn the boat with deceased on them and then push them out to sea. This was done to help their soul get to Valhalla, which was the afterlife designated for those who died in battle. The Vikings also would break the concept of the soul into 4 aspects. Pardon me if I pronounce these wrong, I probably will, but the 4 aspects were the hammer, the hugger, the phlygia, and the hemingia. The hammer was a person's physical appearance, which could change upon death. The hugger was the personality of someone which would continue on with that person after death. In fact, they believed that one's hugger would pass into the body of a newborn relative. The phlygia was basically their spirit animal. For example, a warrior might have a wolf or a bear as theirs. It was believed that this would cease to exist after death. And then we have the hemingia, which was the success one received in life. This would also be continued on in the family after the person's death. In our second spot, we have purgatory. Now, I briefly touched upon this, but let me go into more detail. Followers of the Catholic Church have embraced the concept of purgatory. Basically, those that died but are seen as imperfect in God's eyes have to go and cleanse their soul from sin and undergo purification. Some refer to purgatory as a cleansing fire that they go through. They believe that purgatory isn't a place but a spiritual state of the soul. Now, who goes to purgatory? Well, let's break it down. Obviously, those that live a very holy life go straight to heaven. Same with those who suffer from disease, poverty, or persecution. Those that are not bad enough to go to hell, but are not good enough to go to heaven, go to purgatory. Then, after their cleansing, they're allowed into heaven. And in our number one spot today, we have the hanging coffins. The people of Sagada in the Philippines like to place the dead in wooden coffins, which were then attached to the side of mountains underneath natural overhangs. The coffins were small because the bodies inside of them were placed in a fetal position. This was done because they believed that people should leave the world in the same position that they entered it. Now, the coffins were placed on the mountainsides for a number of reasons. One, it's difficult to reach, so they will never be disturbed. And two, the coffin was closer to the sky, meaning the deceased were closer to heaven, so it was easier for them to reach it.
Number 10, the 21 grams experiment. Dr. Duncan McDougall was obsessed with the afterlife and constructed a very peculiar experiment to answer this question: does the soul have mass? He published a paper titled Hypothesis Concerning Soul Substance Together with Experimental Evidence of the Existence of Such Substance. Not exactly catchy, but that's the title. The paper appeared in April 1907 in an issue of American Medicine. He placed 6 patients dying of tuberculosis in a bed that was balanced in a very specific way. He concluded that at the time of their death, they each lost 21 grams. At first, he thought the weight loss was due to the evaporation of moisture from the skin, but this was much larger than suspected. He even included the loss of fecal and urine, which happens after you die, which could also account for the weight change, and air loss from the lungs, but nothing provided a really clear explanation. He then performed the experiment on dogs and noted that there was no weight change. So, do dogs have souls? Do all dogs go to heaven? I guess we'll never know. Number 9. Closer to Light. Melvin Morse published Closer to Light in the 1990s, which examined 120 cases of children who experienced NDEs, which are, going forward, near-death experiences. In most of the cases, the children were too young to have absorbed any firm religious expectations. However, a lot of the cases recounted having very similar experiences to what was described in, religion. This publication remains very controversial. Between his point-by-point arguments made against biochemistry and hallucinations, it even persuaded some skeptics to become more open-minded about what happens after we die. Number 8. EVP. If you are a fan of ghost hunter shows, then you most likely have heard of the term EVP here and there. This is actually as scientific as it gets in the realm of ghost hunting, but it has led to some curiosities. EVP stands for electromagnetic voice phenomenon. Fluctuations in the electromagnetic field have been a potential reason for the existence of ghosts, or explanation, it's confusing, which is why ghost hunters use them. Essentially what it is a tape recorder that records voices that can only be heard on certain frequencies. Ghost hunters tend to use anything found in these recordings as actual proof, but as to what I could find on my Google search engine, there have been no official scientific journals published pointing to the fact that this is actually legit. Number 7. 10 more minutes. From the moment our heart stops beating, a patient is considered deceased, even if you are revived after it starts again, which is a near-death experience. This process is called death by cardiopulmonary criteria, and it's considered the definition of death for 95% of people. An exemption is when someone's heart is kept beating artificially while the brain has long since died, like long-term comatose patients. For a long time, scientists thought that we had 5 to 10 minutes after death before the cells in our body begin their own funeral procession, but actually that has been disproven. We actually have hours, sometimes days, before the breakdown of our brain cells begins to occur and the damage becomes irreversible. Considering the amount of out-of-body visions people experience sometimes once revived, could this be because their brains aren't technically dead yet? Number 6. Genes. And yes, of course, I mean our biological genes, not our Levi's. A study in the Royal Society's Open Biology revealed a study concerning genes in dead mice and zebrafish. The aim of the study was to see if gene expression diminished slowly or stopped altogether after death. Gene expression, according to the NIH, is a process the cell uses to produce the molecule it needs by reading the genetic code written in the DNA. Unquote. But the results were far stranger than they expected. Over 1,000 genes became more active, not less, after death. Some cases even spiked and lasted for days. University of Washington professor Peter Noble told Newsweek, "We didn't anticipate that. Can you imagine 24 hours after time of death, you take a sample and the transcripts of the genes are actually increasing in abundance? That was a surprise." Unquote. This doesn't mean that we are alive after death, but it does technically mean that parts of our bodies live after death and in fact are quite busy. Number 5. The AWARE study. The AWARE study was a study that set out to examine the broad experiences of awareness experienced during cardiac arrest. We have discussed some parts of the brain that may be responsible, but there could be something else. They tested the validity using objective observations of over 2,060 patients. Out of that grouping, only 140 were able to complete an interview with memories from the event. According to the European Resuscitation Council, and I quote, 46% of them had memories that featured 7 major cognitive themes such as fear, animals and plants, bright lights, violence and persecution, deja vu, family, and recalling events post-cardiac arrest." Unquote. The final notes from this experiment determined the following results. Quote, "This supports other recent studies that have indicated consciousness may be present despite clinically undetectable consciousness. This, together with fearful experiences, may contribute to PTSD and other cognitive deficits post-cardiac arrest." Unquote. So, there could be something that happens that scientists are yet unable to detect and pass our standard understanding. Number 4. A higher sense. Extending off of the earlier point, Dr. Parnia, who was a part of this study, may have an explanation. Dr. Parnia believes that this reaction could be due to use of certain anesthetic drugs. Parnia used ketamine as an example. This anesthetic drug is used for sedation and general anesthesia. However, as most of us know, on the street, it is often used for more nefarious deeds. Ketamine can make someone feel as if they are detached from their bodies and encourage feelings of peace, love, happiness, euphoria, which could be why patients post-cardiac arrest describe moments that compare to this state, but that doesn't answer all the questions. Number 3. OBE, out-of-body experience, versus temporal parietal junction. So what about the visions people have of floating above their body? Beyond near-death experiences, NDEs, people can experience this in other instances such as the psychedelic variety. This implies that there is another side to the mystery. Enter temporal parietal junction. This theory was discovered by accident when Swiss neurologist Dr. Olaf Blanc was trying to discover why his 43-year-old patient was having seizures. While conducting a brain mapping test, one of the electrodes stimulated a region of her brain in such a way that she had an OBE. The area, the angular gyrus, which is part of the temporal parietal junction, induced her OBE each and every time it was stimulated. The TPJ is responsible for sorting through the information we receive every day, going to the coffee shop, wherever else, and puts it in a fine little neat package. It also controls our body comprehension and spatial awareness. Blanc's theory is that if wires are crossed in the TPJ, like it's stimulated, we will be released from our mental confines of our body, which could explain an out-of-body experience, but still some strings left unanswered. Number 2. REM. Many people who have experienced NDEs have reported having astounding visions, but as opposed to a lot of spiritual explanations, a study from the University of Kentucky has a different theory. Their research theorizes that these visions are a result of rapid eye movement called REM intrusion. In this state, a human mind will wake up prior to the body, which results in hallucinations, including feeling detached from one's body. In the instance of NDEs, this intrusion has been triggered by a traumatic experience like cardiac arrest. If this is proven true, then it could be that we are entering a dream state prompted by real environmental sounds around us, which could be how people recall exact details from inside a surgery room. An even more intriguing factor that feeds this theory is that the region where REM is triggered is found in the brainstem, which controls basic body function. This area can also operate independently from the higher brain. So, even after the brain is dead, the brainstem can still technically function. So something does happen after we die, but the next question is, does it just end there? Number 1, not gone, just less orderly. You know what's messed up and weird and cool and wonderful at the same time? Energy can neither be created or destroyed. Here are some physics for the life after death case. According to the first law of thermodynamics, energy that powers life can never be destroyed, but it can transform into a changed state. It can morph into something else. So technically, every piece of energy that fuels you and moves you throughout the world doesn't get destroyed when you die. It transforms into something. Just what it transforms into and where it goes, we have no idea yet. But beyond religiosity, you are welcome to look at it this way. When a loved one dies, energy that belonged to them at a time continues to move throughout the world, so in a way, they are never really gone. This quote from physicist and comedian Aaron Freeman sums it up. You can hope your family will examine the evidence and satisfy themselves that the science is sound and that they'll be comforted to know your energy is still around. According to the law of conservation of energy, not a bit of you is gone, you're just less orderly.